But you accept that up until now, 6 years in, we haven't seen any economic benefit from having left the EU?
No major ones. You've got minor ones, like, as I say, like the liberalisation of vaccines, which was important. After all, it's thousands of lives. Let's not put that to one side so it doesn't matter. It's an economic and a social benefit, and there'll be more of that.
To the main political story of the day, Rishi Sunak speaking to the CBI, facing calls for higher migration to help boost the economy. Want to find out what David Davis thinks about that, Conservative MP, former Brexit Secretary. Morning, David.
Good morning.
Is increasing migration the answer to solving our problems?
No, it's not. I mean, in the year up to June, there were 331,000 work permits given out, more than half either for skilled or for social care personnel. It's been growing every month since the new system was put in place in 2020. I mean, Mr. Danker, always remember that Mr. Danker's history as he worked in the Treasury in the end of Gordon Brown's tenure, or as tenure as Prime Minister, and the Treasury motif in those days, and the Labour Party motif was, grow the economy by unlimited immigration. Now, that's fine. It does make the economy get bigger. It doesn't make everyone richer. I mean, just to take two examples. If you bring in a very lowly paid unskilled worker, that will increase the size of the economy, make the Treasury happy, but it won't increase the average wage in the economy. In fact, it'll depress it by competition. It'll drive it down. If you bring in a very skilled person, a technologist or a scientist or a designer or a very highly paid manager, that will bring the average up. And really, the strategy should be twofold. It should be to try and bring the average up, to stop absolutely sort of screaming shortages in the short term, but to encourage our own industry to train up people. I mean, one of the things Danker said was, "Oh well, the skill balance is wrong." Well, part of the reason for that is that British industry has done completely insufficient training for 30, 40 years, largely because it's relied on pulling people in from the European Union, which we didn't even know the numbers. So no, he's wrong. I think what we're going to see is going to be a period of transition, undoubtedly. But what British industry's got to get used to is that the real wages of British employees are going to get higher slowly. I mean, got to get through the inflation crisis first. But once we're through it, that's what the trend will be.
Is it also partly successive governments' fault for not improving the skills of the country? Actually, governments have been quite happy to see high levels of migration to try and plug gaps.
A bit. I mean, I don't want to be hyper political about this. I mean, it was certainly true under Labour because their whole strategy was a sort of open door. I mean, it was saying one thing and doing the opposite is what it was. I mean, I used to be Shadow Home Secretary, so I'm altogether too familiar with it. But there has been a tendency. Now, the government actually in recent years has improved the training skills and indeed the sort of amount of tax credits and subsidies, effective subsidies available, but it's still not enough. But it's got to be taken up by industry. They've got to make use of it, and they've got out of the habit. Look, I used to be a director of a FTSE 100 company, in fact, two of them. And one of our major tasks in those days, before free movement, was to make sure that we had the skilled people for the coming years. And we didn't think that was government's job. We thought it was our job.
Let's turn our attention to the other big political story over the weekend. Reports in the Sunday Times of senior government figures looking at some sort of Swiss-style arrangement with the EU. What did you make of those reports?
Well, I don't want to be rude about your sister paper, particularly as I like the journalists on it. But if you look at the story, 3/4 of it is from unnamed sources, senior source in government, unnamed source in number 10. And to be quite blunt with you, they plainly didn't know what they were talking about. I mean, I actually spoke to Jeremy Hunt on Saturday about this exact issue, and he has absolutely no intention of going in for a Swiss-style arrangement. People don't realise that the Swiss arrangement is almost as binding as being inside the single market. Now, people will talk about it being inside a single market as a wonderful thing. Actually, it takes away your democratic rights to decide your own laws. And the Swiss find that. And the Swiss are they're sort of uncomfortable with it, truth be told. They had a referendum a couple of years back where they said they wanted to limit migration. And were told by the European Union, hard luck, you can't, in effect. And it took a long, long time to negotiate. Now, what was in there, which was truthful, is that there's a gradual relaxation going on of the tension, the post-Brexit tension, if you like, between Europe and Britain. And that's good. That's frankly, it's overdue. It should have started quite a while ago. And that's happening partly because of Ukraine, partly because post-COVID, people realize there are other things than EU membership to worry about, partly because they're all concerned about their economies. And it's always been true. I mean, somebody in that article was talking about, oh, well, they realize it's in their benefit. They've always known it's in their benefit. But at the moment, that's more acute because of the post-COVID pressures and the post-Ukraine pressures on every economy in Europe, every economy in the world. So there is some substance to the sort of direction of travel in terms of liberalization, but it's not direction of travel either in terms of migration. The government knows full well they couldn't do that. A Labour government couldn't do that, frankly, electorally, and it won't be in terms of increasing the sort of regulatory subordination to the European Union. That's not going to happen. What might happen, I guess, is some degree of mutual recognition. What they'll be working for is mutual recognition of standards, so that in the car industry, I mean, basically the car industry standards mostly come from a global arrangement. So there's no reason why we can't do some cross recognition of standards, but it won't be ever again a subordination of the British Parliament effectively to European decisions.
What about the economic impact of all that, though, David Davis? It's good to have our democratic rights, but can you honestly say with a straight face that the British economy has benefited from us having left the EU 6 years ago?
You can't unscramble it at the moment. I remember I was asked this by Andrew Neil. I said, ask me in a year, and a whole load of Remainers said, oh, look, he's not going to justify Brexit. Well, look, I can point at things like the vaccine success. I can point at the fact that we're now able. In fact, Hunt referred to it in his very briefly in his budget speech on the growth agenda element of it. He talked about being able to liberalize our regulation on artificial intelligence, on pharmaceuticals, a whole series of areas where we have global economic advantages. But the trouble is, actually, you can't point. I mean, there's not been the
But we were told, David Davis, that it was going to help the economy, and at the moment we're having an argument about whether or not it's had a negative effect.
Well, no, I mean, you were told that, but you're also told by the other side that it would completely destroy the economy. Now, that second has not been true, and the first is rather. Wait, let me finish it, Matt. The second is rather covered over by a mixture of post-COVID and current Ukraine-based problems. So, I think it will provide significant benefits. It's going to take a bit longer than I thought it would at the time, because partly two reasons. One is things like the post-COVID outcomes, but the other is, frankly, some of the negotiations done at Theresa May. The reason I resigned were just not very intelligent, and they've been recovered from largely now, but not completely. And it'll take a bit of time, but it'll be beneficial. I've got no doubt about that.
So, but you accept that up until now, 6 years in, we haven't seen any economic benefit from having left the EU.
No major ones. You've got minor ones, like, as I say, like the liberalisation of vaccines, which was important. After all, it's thousands of lives. Let's not put that to one side so it doesn't matter. It's an economic and a social benefit, and there'll be more of that. You'll see our medical-based industries and our software-based industries grow significantly.
Oh, I think we
just easing our way out of a COVID crisis. You can't make any sensible economic measures at the moment.
Just finally, on economic measures, we're talking to Paul Johnson from the Institute of Fiscal Studies in the next half an hour. He says in the Times today that we are now in the new normal is an era of high taxation. Are you happy about that? Will you vote for it when the autumn statement comes through?
I'm going to vote for this week, but I just think he's plumb wrong. I mean, the simple truth is that this budget, if you like, was decided against the backdrop of not being able to scare the financial markets. After the Kwarteng era, bluntly, the absolute box we're in is we've got to be able to stabilise the financial view of the United Kingdom economy. Once a variety of things happen. Once gas prices come down and stabilise, which is already happening, and it will continue to happen. Once the international supply difficulties unravel, I mean, you may or may not be aware, there's been huge shortages of electronic components in the last year or so. That's now turning into a glut. So that's going to take a constraint off. And after 6 months of having Jeremy and Rishi in charge, I think the financial markets will be much more relaxed. So when we get to the March budget, we'll actually have a lot more room for maneuver, precisely because we've taken a load of tough decisions now. And I think quite a lot of the economics profession, put it as broadest, and particularly the government-based economics profession, really haven't caught up with what the new normal is, which is a post-COVID normal. It's much bigger, and it blots out everything else. And they really haven't worked out. I mean, they're not alone. I mean, lots of people haven't. They really haven't worked out how the mechanics works these days. And they neither, because many of them really just assume Brexit's a disaster, neither have they looked at the openings that are now becoming very much available to us. And you know, Hunt, who was after all a Remainer, is completely convinced that these openings are going to cause significant growth increases. And that's what he's working on.
Yeah. David Davis, good to speak to you. Thanks very much for your time this morning. David Davis, their former Brexit secretary, responded to quite a lot of political and economic news.